Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, November 7th, 2024. This Shabbos, in our Torah portion of Lechah, we learn of the first instance of Aliyah, Jewish people moving to Israel. And that happens at the very beginning as God commands Avraham and Sarah to leave their home and to settle in Israel. So it shouldn't surprise us that the term for a Jew leaving home and settling in Israel, Aliyah, which literally means to ascend, to rise up, that word also has its source in our Torah portion. Shortly after Avraham and Sarah reach Israel, the Torah tells us, Vayihi ra'av ba'aretz, there was a famine in the land, Vayered Avram Mitzrayma, and Avraham descended to Egypt, went down to Egypt, and then, after their tumultuous time there, the Torah tells us, Vaya'al Avram mimitzrayim, and Avraham ascended, rose up from Egypt to go back to Israel. So the word Vaya'al is the verb form of the word that we use, Aliyah, same word. And this connects with what our sages tell us, Eretz Yisrael gavoa mikol ha'arotzos. Israel is the highest of all the lands in the world. The problem with that is, how can the Talmud make that claim? Because it is certainly not the most northern spot in the world, and it doesn't have the tallest mountain. The highest mountain is Har Hermon, Mount Hermon in the north of Israel, and there are many places with taller mountains. In fact, Israel does have the lowest spot in the world, that's the Dead Sea, but there doesn't seem to be any manner in which Israel can be considered the highest. So I want to share with you an insight of the Chassam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer. He lived in Hungary about 200 years ago, and he has a very creative answer to this. He says that the earth is a sphere in the shape of a ball. And anytime you have a sphere, it's impossible to definitively say which is the highest point, because everything depends on how you hold it. If you have a sphere in your hands, you could hold it like this, and then you could turn it. So what's on the bottom is on the top. There is no top or bottom. It depends on how you're holding it. And the Chassam Sofer explains that's what we mean that Israel is the highest nation. It is proscriptive, not descriptive. It's telling us that if we hold the world correctly, if we look at the world correctly, Israel will be on the top, the highest point. If you hold it differently, Israel will not be at the top. It will be on the side. It could be on the bottom. But it's proscriptive in that it is the essential job of a Jew to have the proper perspective in life to ensure that Israel, that Jerusalem, is at the top, always at the pinnacle. That is, we have to look at the world in such a way that Israel is the highest. Highest in sanctity, highest in significance. So Aliyah is not only about geographic location, it is about geographically, physically moving from outside of Israel to Israel, but it is also about our perspective in how a Jewish person views the world. It is stunning and incredible to note that over the past year, Israel has experienced more Aliyah than at any time, at least in the past 10 years. Approximately 30,000 people moved from outside of Israel to make Aliyah, to settle in Israel. And that is during this war, with all of the difficulties, with all of the challenges, Aliyah is higher than in the last 10 years. Incredible. And I think this Shabbos, it is appropriate for us to think about Aliyah, to think about moving to Israel. And I think that at the same time, it is appropriate to appreciate the experience of living in Israel. And many times I've told you stories in the category of only in Israel. And I want to share one with you. This is a story that is told by a woman named Orly Summers. A few years ago, she made Aliyah from the United States to Israel. She is a single woman, divorced, and she has 4 young children. So she made Aliyah. And she got to Israel. This was several years ago, and it was very, very tough because she was newly divorced, and she's raising 4 children on her own, and she's in a new country. She doesn't understand how it works, and she is just not sure how she's going to manage this, how she's going to be able to do this, pull this off. So she decided one day that she was going to take her children on an outing, and she didn't even know exactly where she was going to go. She wanted to take the children somewhere that would be fun for them, but she just couldn't put together what would make sense. So they went to the bus stop, and they were waiting for a bus, and she didn't even have the emotional energy to try to figure out which bus should we take. She was just overwhelmed by everything that was going on. So she's there with her 4 children, and she flags a taxi. Okay, so the 4 children get into the back seat of the taxi. She's sitting in the front in the passenger seat. The driver's in the driver's seat, and they're driving. And she realizes that her children behind her need to see a mother who's a little bit in control, need to see a mother who's got her act together, which she really does not have, but she somehow has to convince her children that she's going to be able to handle this. So she starts to talk to the taxi driver in Hebrew, in Ivrit. She had spoke Hebrew, and she had lived on a kibbutz years before, and she figured she can speak Hebrew like a native. And she started speaking to the taxi driver, imagining that her children in the back seat are thinking to themselves, wow, our mother, she's really in control here. She knows what she's doing. She's getting it taken care of. So she talks to the taxi driver. She talks about the weather. She talks about the time she took her kids to the beach. And she could imagine her children behind her being very impressed. Here she is talking to the taxi driver. Everything's going okay. She knows what she's doing, where she's going. She was a hero. And then it's like a fingernail going across a chalkboard. The driver says to her, "So where in London are you from, Habibi?" And he says to her, it'd probably be easier if you just speak English, because I have not understood one word you said in Hebrew. And now she's just crushed. This is in front of her children. And the one detail of empowerment that she thought she had, she did not have even that. And she was just crushed. But the taxi driver took over. He suggested a place to go, and he suggested a restaurant to go afterwards, and he started pointing out to the children the landmarks as they were driving, what they're seeing, what it means, telling us a little bit about the history. And he was amazing. He was bringing this country to life for her children. So just as they reach the destination and they're about to get out of the taxi driver turns around to the children and he says to them, "Listen, kids, you know you have an awesome mama there. The best of the best. Look after her carefully because you don't get another one." And then the taxi driver turns to this woman, Arlie, and he says to her, "You know, you have great kids, right? Great kids for a great mama. And Hashem will watch over all of you. And for sure, everything will be just fine." Only in Israel, the top of the world. And may we all merit one day to call it our home. So there's a narrative in this week's Torah portion. Avraham is living in Israel, and there is a war. Avraham has nothing to do with it. It's a war of 4 kings against 5 kings. Avraham has nothing to do with this war, but somebody comes to tell him that his nephew Lot, who had come with him and Sarah, his nephew Lot was captured and was being held prisoner. So Avraham went to save his nephew, and he gathered a small army, and he went to save his nephew Lot, and he succeeded. And so the king of the nation that he helped wanted to honor Avraham. Because they were very grateful to what Avraham did, defeated their enemy. And the king said to Avraham, "You can have any of the spoils of the war that you want. You can take any of the possessions that you want." Normally the spoils go to the victor, but the king says, "You take whatever you want. I'm very grateful to you for what you did." And Avraham refused to take anything. The Torah says, it's very, very strong language. I mean, you can imagine from the words, Avraham is saying this in a very, very strong way. Harimosi yadi el Hashem kel elyon. I lift up my hand as an oath to God, Konei Shamayim va'aretz, the God who created heaven and earth, im michut v'atzroch nal v'im ekach mikol asher lecha. I refuse to take anything from you. I refuse to take a shoelace from you. V'lo somar, and you will not be able to say, Ani hesharti es Avraham. I'm the one that made Avraham wealthy. I don't want anything from you. Nothing, zero. And that's very insistent language. We know that Avraham is not opposed to receiving gifts on principle. Avraham received gifts from Paro after the disastrous trip down to Egypt. Avraham received gifts from Avimelech. We're going to learn about that a little bit later. Another king in another part of Israel. So he wasn't against accepting gifts. Why is he so insistent not to take any reward or gift for saving Lot and helping out this king? So I want to share with you another story from Rabbi Paysach Krohn. This happened in Israel many years ago. There was a young boy. We'll call him Yitzchak. It's not his real name. Yitzchak, religious boy, and it's on Shabbos afternoon. He's walking on the street, and he sees a gold coin on the street. But it's Shabbos. Can't pick it up. Can't take it, but it's worth a lot of money. It's worth so much money, it could have fed his family for 2 weeks, a gold coin. But it was Shabbos. So he had a plan. He decided that he would stand there. He would put his foot on top of the coin, and he would stand there. And it was about 2 hours until the end of Shabbos. So the plan was he would stand there, not move. No one would see the coin. In 2 hours, when it gets dark and Shabbos is over, he'll pick up the coin and take it home. Sounds like a good plan. Certainly a permissible way to act. But nearby, there was a non-Jewish boy who was watching this little boy Yitzchak and watched him holding his foot kind of in a strange manner that aroused the curiosity of this other boy. The other boy comes over to him and says, "What are you hiding under your foot?" And this boy Yitzchak says, "I'm not hiding anything, I'm just standing here." Well, the other boy pushed him, knocked him to the ground, saw the prize, saw the coin, and took it for himself and ran away. So Yitzchak was very, very disappointed. He was very upset. Okay, it's nearing the end of Shabbos. He goes to shul, the shul that he normally goes to. Normally, Yitzchak would be very, very active when he got to shul on Shabbos afternoon, helping to set up, helping to arrange things, helping to make sure everything is going to go well. But this Shabbos, he just sits in the corner. He's very dejected, very disappointed. He lost the coin, the money. It was very valuable. And he just kind of sits there. And the rabbi notices. And when Shabbos was over, the rabbi called Yitzchak over and said to him, "What's wrong? It's obvious that you're upset. You're not your usual self. What happened? What's wrong?" So Yitzchak tells him the story of the coin and how valuable it was, and he lost it, and he's upset. So the rabbi says to Yitzchak, this is after Shabbos is over, he says to Yitzchak, "I'm very, very proud of you. You didn't violate the laws of Shabbos, even when it meant a lot, it took a lot, but you didn't violate the laws of Shabbos. I'm very proud of you. And you deserve a reward." So he took out from his desk a gold coin that was equivalent to the coin that Yitzchak was trying to keep for himself. And the rabbi says to Yitzchak, "Here, I'm willing to give you this coin, which is worth the same amount of the coin that you wanted that you lost. I'm going to give it to you as a reward for being so careful about observing the laws of Shabbos, on one condition. I'll give you the coin, but you have to give me the reward for the mitzvah that you did. Observing Shabbos even when it's difficult, that's a great mitzvah. You're going to be rewarded by Hashem." So the rabbi says, "I'll give you the money, and you give me the reward. Is that okay with you?" And the boy says, "You keep the coin, Rabbi. I'll keep the mitzvah." And the rabbi leaned over and kissed Yitzchak on the head. Paro gave presents to Avraham to compensate him for the harm that he had caused him. Avshalom gives presents to Avraham as compensation for the losses that he had incurred due to the trouble that he had there. That's fine. But to take a reward for saving Lot, Saving Lot is a mitzvah. It's his nephew. He did an incredible mitzvah, an incredible act. And you remember, within the context of the narrative, he and Lot were no longer close. They were living separately. They were not getting along with each other. But the mitzvah of Avraham helping his nephew, even under those circumstances, was so great. He did not want to share that with anyone. I refuse to take any reward for the mitzvah that I did, because that mitzvah is mine. So the Torah portion begins, Lech Lechah, Avraham and Sarah and Lot, go from your land, from your homeland, from your father's house, and go to the place that I tell you, that I show you. Ve'escha l'goy gadol va'avoracheka. I'm sorry. I apologize. I made a mistake. Ve'escha l'goy gadol va'avorachecha. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. So, as we know from the Torah, Avraham listens to God, Avraham and Sarah and Lot, and they go as God directs. As soon as they reach Israel, the narrative that we just saw, he's got to leave again. There's a famine, and he has to leave and go down to Egypt. And then you remember that narrative, they had to pretend that Sarah was really his sister, not his wife. I mean, God had said that he was going to bless Avraham for leaving and going on this journey to Israel. Doesn't seem like there's any blessing if he has to leave the destination, and if he has to get himself into this moral quandary of not saying exactly the honest thing. And we find throughout the next few Torah portions that what happens to Avraham appears to be the opposite of God blessing him. 4 different times in this week's Torah portion, next week's Torah portion, 4 different times God promises Avraham that he will have children, that he will have many children, and be the source of a great and mighty nation. Okay, so we're going to read later that Avraham did have a son with Hagar, not with Sarah. The son was named Yishmael. Okay, but at least Avraham has a son. Then God tells Avraham to send Yishmael away. Sarah tells Avraham it's not good for Yishmael to be there, because by then Yitzchak, Isaac, had been born to Avraham and Sarah. So Avraham, under duress, sends Hagar and his son, Hagar's son, Yishmael, away. Okay, so God promises him that through Yitzchak, he will become mighty and a great nation. Vesbrisi akim es Yitzchak. God says, at that point, I'm going to fulfill my promise that you will become numerous and mighty through your son Yitzchak. Asher teili lecha Sarah, lamoed hazeh b'shana acheres. That Sarah will give birth to this son Yitzchak. So it's with the background of all these promises and the difficulty that Avraham and Sarah had in finally having a son of their own, Yitzchak. It's against this promise that we have to understand the narrative in next week's Torah portion. The narrative of Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. God says to Avraham, Vayomer kachna as bincha, take your son, es yitchidcha, your only son, asher ahavta, who you love, es Yitzchak, v'haleu la'ola, and offer him as an offering. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks points out that this was not a trial to see if Avraham had the courage to offer his son as an offering to God. In fact, we know from other places in the Torah and other sources that child sacrifice was not unknown in the ancient world. There were other people who had done such terrible things, horrible, terrible, unimaginable to us, but it was something that was done. However, we know that this was explicitly a test, because the Torah introduces this narrative next week. V'elakim nisas Avraham. God tested Avraham and said to him, take your son and offer him as an offering. So the classic interpretation of this that's given by most of the commentators is that by Avraham showing himself willing to offer his son Yitzchak as an offering, as a sacrifice, Avraham was showing that he loved God even more than he loved his own son. That's a common way to understand that, a classic way to understand that. But that's very, very difficult. Because the problem with that is that the Torah repeatedly prohibits child sacrifice, explicitly prohibits it. It was practiced in the ancient world. We know about it from other places in the Torah. But had the point of this test been Avraham being willing to offer his son as a sacrifice, then Avraham would have just shown himself to be no different than the pagans who are around him. And besides that, the word Avram means mighty father, and we know that Avraham was supposed to show that he was a role model for his descendants. What kind of a role model are you going to be if you're doing such a terrible thing that violates your entire value system that the Torah explicitly prohibits? So, if we take a step back, one of the most perplexing aspects of the entire narrative of Abraham's life is the disconnect between God's promises and the reality. God promised 7 different times, God promised that the land of Israel would belong to Avraham and his descendants. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll see by the time Sarah died and Avraham was an old man, he still didn't even own any land to be able to bury his wife Sarah. He had to negotiate to buy a piece of land in which to bury Sarah. What happened to God's promise repeated 7 times that he would inherit the land, that he would have the whole entire land? And all the promises that Avraham received from God that he would have children, and now God says to him, I want you to offer your only son as a sacrifice. What happened to the promises? Rabbi Sacks points out that what Avraham is learning through these narratives in his life is that there is a long road between God's promise and God's fulfilling that promise. Not because God doesn't keep his word, but because Avraham was being given a mission that was revolutionary. He was being asked to start an ideal society based on a connection with God, based on principles of morality. And God was teaching Avraham from the very beginning, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort, and there are setbacks. And you have to keep going, even if you're tired and lost and exhausted and despondent, you still have to keep on going. God will bring about everything that God promised, but not immediately. And not directly. Because God seeks those who have the tenacity of faith to keep going despite all setbacks. This is what the life of Avraham is about. And this is the story of Jewish history. It is our story today. So, yes, the test, the trial of the binding of Isaac was not only about the morality of human sacrifice. Yes, it was that. But much more fundamentally, it was about uncertainty. Could Avraham maintain his faith in God even when it appears that for now God is not fulfilling God's own promises? And that is precisely the test that we face today. Because at this moment it appears to us that so many of the promises that God made to us are further from being fulfilled than almost any time we can remember. But Rabbi Sachs concludes, Avraham taught us that faith is not certainty. Faith is the courage to live with uncertainty. Avraham knew the promises would come true. Avraham demonstrated that he could live with the uncertainty of not knowing how, not knowing when. Let me share this with you in the form of a poem. This was a poem that appeared in Israel in Hebrew originally. I'm going to share with you a translation that was done by Daniel Gordis. It's a poem that appeared, and it was widely circulated on social media in Israel about a year ago, just a few weeks after the war began. I don't know the name of the woman who wrote it, but it was widely circulated about a year ago. I want to share some of it with you. It's a woman who is pregnant, and in this poem, she is speaking to the baby inside her. 7th month, my little boy. This is not how I thought it would look. I imagined us in nature and streams, that your coming birth would fill our lives. We were wrapped in excitement and comfort, anticipating your arrival, arranging, dreaming, nesting. I didn't imagine that pastoral image, my little boy, would be replaced by sirens, missiles, and shelters, by sorrow that has spread like a blanket over the days and nights, endless concern for family and loved ones, and an earth that trembles from its encounter with a brutal evil that we didn't want to believe existed. This week I asked you, my little boy, if you are sure this is where you want to come, to this world, to this earth. I told you that you have time to change your mind, and I will completely understand you. I will have no complaints. And then I felt you. You smiled at me, and you explained it to me well, that you do know where you have chosen to come. You're coming to this land, meaning the land of Israel. And I understood at that moment, my brave soul, whatever you need from me, it's not inventing a perfect world for you. You need me to trust you and me, that you know to where you are coming, and that it won't always be easy here. So I promise you today and always, my child, not that when you grow up there won't be more wars, only that I will always be here for you to embrace, contain, soften, and nurse, and to pour love and light into every crack and fracture. When you're in pain, when the tears come, when reality tempts to get you tough, Mom is here with you all the way, and in whatever path you choose to walk. This world isn't perfect, my child, and neither are we. And I can't really guarantee you that we will succeed in creating a different, better reality here. But I promise you, with all my heart, that we will never stop trying. May God's promises be fully and completely fulfilled, swiftly, now. And Avraham will be vindicated in his faith. My friends, I wish you a beautiful evening and a very special Shabbos, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.